So we have a terrific panel, and I think the last question that was asked in the room about what's next is what we want to focus on. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So we want to focus on what's next, and we want to give a voice and a face to some of the things that Justin was bringing up earlier. I want to just take a minute or two before we get started to frame the conversation a little bit by maybe starting off building on what Jonathan was saying earlier about why we need philanthropy. So if you think about it this way, nonprofits operate under what is an inherently inefficient economic model. And what I mean by that is with a for-profit can create a good or a service, sell it to the marketplace for more than its cost of production. That's its profit margin. With nonprofits, they create a good or a service, but it's really hard to sell it to the community for more than its cost of production because so much of the value is a social value. And so in order to cover the costs of production, we need to fill that gap with charitable contributions. And that's why philanthropy becomes so important. Now, fortunately, Americans are incredibly generous. And I think that's not just because of our tax policy, but I think it's also because it's part of our culture. It's part of where we came from as revolutionaries and pioneers, doing barn raisings and helping each other expand our community. So that's sort of baked into our DNA. And if you look at the numbers from the most recent surveys that we have on sort of macro giving in the country, Americans gave more than $390 billion to charitable organizations in the prior year. And as always, about 75% of that comes from individuals. So nearly $270 billion, that's a lot of money. However, at the same time, we have an increasing number of nonprofits operating in the country. If you go back to the 90s, we had about 600,000. Today we have close to 1.8 million nonprofits. So that pool, the same pool that everybody is fishing in, there's a lot of fishing poles in that water. And then we also have this incredible transfer of wealth that's about to happen, another opportunity. So it's starting now, it's going to go on for the next 25 or 30 years, but it's estimated that $30 trillion is going to pass from baby boomers to Gen X and millennials over the next 30 years. So what does that mean for philanthropy going forward? So we have a lot of questions that are percolating up from Justin's comments this morning, and we're going to dig in, see if we can get some firsthand accounts of what's going on right now. So here's how we're going to do it. We have four great people up here. I'm going to let them do a little self-introduction and then talk about how they're involved in philanthropy, and then we'll dig into some of the questions. So Sasha, why don't we start with you, since you're closest?
Hi, I am Sasha Zolik. We have been residents of the Valley since 2011. I'm a mom of four. I am here representing a little bit of a new perspective on how we get our children involved in giving back, and specifically giving back to their community and the things that affect them and their peers.
Is this okay? I'm Kirk Davenport. I really enjoyed Justin's presentation because during that presentation it became clear to me why I'm here, and I'm an example of a new asshole. So I want to hear, but I'm teachable. So I hope you learn while I'm here. We first got, and my wife Peggy and I moved here from New York City in 2016. We both were practicing law 70 hours a week and got tired of that after 30 years. We got involved with philanthropy here because Leslie Peterson made a contribution to the Jackson Hole Conservation Alliance in our name 10 years ago. And we've been involved with them ever since. I'm also involved with the Grand Teton National Park Foundation. My wife Peggy is on the Competitive Grants Committee of the Community Foundation, and we are huge advocates and supporters of Jackson Hole Public Art, where Peggy serves on the board. So I try to follow Peggy around and learn. I try to learn from Leslie. I hope you guys will teach us something today, because it's clear we have a lot to learn. At least I do.
Thanks, Kurt.
Okay, here's another asshole. So hi, my name is Jeff Flug. I think the program is Flug, but it's F-L-U-G. My wife and I have been residents here for 3 years. We work every day to be our old guard mentality, even though we're new guard, I guess. But just by background, I spent 32 years in New York City, and that was probably 31 and a half years longer than I ever thought I would live in New York City. Raised 3 daughters, who are all out of the house now, and been living here now, like I said, in Wilson for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was in the restaurant industry for about 7 years in New York. You may have known one of our brands. It was called Shake Shack. It's a hamburger place. I was president of that company, and before that, probably more relevant, I was the CEO of an African humanitarian organization. And we could get to that later on, if anyone wants to talk about some of that philanthropy like we did. I got into philanthropy because I met this woman pretty early on, and if you know Elaine, and you'll know her in a second, she's a force, and she will play in. So I'm on the board of Silicon Couloir, an organization that really works with young entrepreneurs. I probably work with about a dozen local entrepreneurs right now, helping their ideas and concepts to try to scale their businesses up. There's probably nothing, well, I should say nothing more I like to do. I guess a powder day is the best thing you can do out here, but if it's not a powder day, it's a pretty good day for me to work with some young entrepreneurs trying to get their ideas going.
Cool.
Thanks, Jeff.
Hi everybody, Elaine Carney, and I moved here in 1993 to be a Knowles instructor. And that's what I did in my 20s, and basically worked in philanthropy and nonprofits, in education and in conservation and actually environmental conflict resolution my whole life since I was 16. Most recently, in the last 14 years, I've helped about 35 organizations raise $400 million as a single shingle. Now actually with several associates. Carter Cox is in the room and she's part of my team now, and I have an associate in Bozeman, Montana. And we help regional nonprofit organizations, mostly conservation, children and youth services, and education organizations raise money and specifically plan for and implement large capital campaigns. So it's a huge honor to work in this space. I, for years, worked out of town, was flying all over the place, and now because everything is so electronic these days, I can actually save donor dollars by not traveling to my clients and work with them via Zoom. So I actually have been skiing a lot in the winters in the past couple years and enjoying that. But really happy to be here, delighted to have John here. Thank you, Catherine, for asking us to participate, and we're excited to share with you and then also mostly hear from all of you about your perspectives. But I do think that the future is very bright when you talk. Phil, I'm going to address your question right now. What does the future look like? And you want me to just get started?
Yeah, just keep going.
And then I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Why don't you ask?
So,
I don't know what my question is, but why don't you ask my question, John? And then.
well, Elaine, just off the top of my head, I thought I would ask you, what are your thoughts about what you see as the biggest changes coming down the pike for how nonprofits will be funded in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah. So everyone knows that at the end of 2017, there was a tax code that was changed significantly by the Trump administration. And there was a mad scramble with economic advisors, with philanthropy advisors, with nonprofits, trying to figure out what this new code is going to look like. And so I've worked with many of my clients to explain to their boards what is it, how does that impact us? And that's the macro introduction piece that I'd like to get started on, because it informs the local conversation. So basically, historically, over the last 20 or 15 years, 33% of American households itemize their deductions. That means that they met the standard deduction and they went over that threshold, which historically was $12,000 per couple. And that was the bulk of the charitable giving history that we just heard from Justin about, and Jonathan. In this new tax code, the estimate is that that group of people, historically 33% of everyone basically submitting their taxes, that will convert to 5%. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of them is that the standard deduction has doubled, and so people that are in that middle donor category are not going to bump up against that top threshold of $24,000 per couple. So that's going to take a whole section of people, potentially, I'll get back to that in a minute, out of that middle donor realm. But it also is going to hyper-focus and hyper-concentrate charitable giving to the top 5% of the country. And most of those folks, many of those folks live in Jackson Hole, right? The other piece that is happening here is that this new tax code, you've heard of state and local taxes, which we don't really have as part of our vernacular in Jackson Hole because we live in Wyoming and there's no state income tax. But states like California and New York those are no longer deductible as well, right? So those state and local taxes that folks have paid, they've been able to bundle that into their charitable and into their IRS paperwork. Sorry?
It's actually capped at 10,000.
Capped at 10,000, right, exactly. But again, it pushes up that, it's the threshold of the itemization, it's the standard deductions. Many people aren't going to go over that 24,000 and get them up over into itemized category. That's what's pushing that number to 5%. Thank you for that correction. So what does that mean for philanthropy? What does that mean for Jackson Hole? What does that mean for our community? And when I look at the values and sort of reflecting on what Justin said earlier, my perspective on philanthropy in Jackson Hole is very different. My perspective is that people move here, like all three of you guys, Sasha, Kirk, and Jeff, because they're attracted to our community. They're deeply connected to the place. Many of the people that I've met that have moved here recently have been coming here for 20 or 30 years. They have an emotional connection to our community, and we have done a very good job marketing Jackson Hole to the people that are going to love it. And it's not everybody. This is a tough place to live, as we all know. This winter is kind of calm, but Snowmageddon was intense last year, and we all, it is not for the faint of heart. So I do think that there is a group of people that come here who are deeply committed to keeping this place the way it is, and maybe it's when they got here, but how can you fault them for that? Deeply committed to getting to know the people that live here, which is my experience with all three of you guys and lots of people in the room. My husband John Carney is an architect, and so we meet a lot of these people right when they come into town. They bought a piece of land, they want to design a house, they walk through the doors at Carney Loganberg. That is pretty common, and those people have all become our dear friends. And they all ask us, who should we give to? Who do you like to give to? What organizations? What boards do you want? This board approached me. Should I join that board? And it's a collaborative process, and it's one that is bound from and comes out of a generous spirit. And it is not. I don't see it as one that is only based on social connectivity either. I think it's more based on a deep love of this place. So. Jeff was timing me, and maybe, and I've gone over. But
thanks, Elaine. That was great.
I think there's a whole bunch of stuff. You covered a bunch of the pieces with baby boomers and the transfer of wealth. And the one last thing I will say, because I'm probably running out of time, is that I've been working with several families that have significant wealth, high net worth families on their philanthropy. I help families plan their philanthropic giving as well. And Carter and I just finished a strategic plan for a family that's more nationally based. And the siblings, or 3 siblings, and the 3 of them wanted to each bring their own thread into the process. And they talked about access to healthy play spaces, access to healthy food, and participation in the democratic process. Because they see that nonprofits are the change makers, and the government is not to be trusted in terms of, or relied upon as it has maybe been in the past, to really push forward who we are as a country and invest in those initiatives that make us a country, and back to the pioneers and who we were and what makes us a country. And that was a really fun process. We gave away some money, and the organizations that we gave to were all doing amazing work in that space, but it's more national. So that's what my experience observing millennials and their giving, who are going to inherit all this money, right? And they're going to be the recipients of these planned gifts and these bequests, as part of this nonprofit process. They're going to steward those, and those they're not completely different, but they are. They really want hands-on. They really want to participate, and they want to make sure that the money hits the ground and makes the world a better place, and basically keeps an eye on who we are as a country, fundamentally.
Thanks, Elaine. And I want to continue on the thread of what you were saying about the emotional connection, and ask Jeff. You mentioned before that you worked with a nonprofit that was doing work in Africa, and so my question for you is, what inspires you? What inspires you to give, and what inspires your philanthropy?
Sure. I'd probably break that down in maybe two ways. There's giving of your money, and there's giving of your time. So, and I actually think the first one's a little easier. First one is a friend of yours or an organization you might like calls you up and says, you know, we have a gala or a fundraising, write a check. And I'm not trying to minimize that, but that's important. So you write a check. Lane calls me up, I'm writing a check somehow, okay? But the more important one is what inspires you to give your time. And, you know, I think everybody here has skill sets. I don't know what they are, but I know you do have them. I've been here 3 years. It's a pretty amazing community of motivated people. And for me, it was like, you know, my father was pretty poor growing up. So I just, you know, poverty was always in my life early on. And so if I get the opportunity to help really some poor people, and this happened to be people living below the poverty line, about 1.1 billion people living in sub-Saharan Africa, who live on the equivalent of $1 a day, I got pretty jazzed up trying to be part of that solution, whether it was trying to get them food security. And so I won't go into a whole bit of work, but that inspired me. And so I guess I'd break it down to then, I think I would look at your skill set and say, where could you be most impactful giving your time? And that could be, it could be in the wilderness, it could be people. You know, for me, I said earlier, I kind of naturally gravitated to young people here. It's not, actually not even young, some people here who are trying to have a sustainable career in this community. And what they maybe lacked was some financial acumen or business background, how to put together a business plan, how to actually think about raising capital. What does that even look like? But these are bright young people. I keep saying young. Some of them aren't so young. I'm 55, so everyone's young to me. But that inspired me as a good way to be involved in the community. Because I felt like I could have helped them move the needle. I couldn't really help move the needle in probably 98% of the areas or issues affecting this community. But I thought that could be one area I could be motivated and additive to.
Great, thank you, thank you. So getting a little bit more specific, I mean, one of the questions that I hear constantly is why do people give? Where do they give? Why do they not give? So Kirk, I want to turn to you and ask you about your strategies around those things, whether that's programmatic or geographic, however you want to talk about that.
Sure. I think I'm going to say why I don't give, in the hopes that I'll run out of time. Why do I give? Well, Peggy and I moved here because it's an awesome, magical place. And that is what you can see out the windows and what you can see inside the room. It's a community, as you guys know better than I do, and I'm learning, and I keep finding more layers of how awesome this place is, full of committed people who want to protect this magical community that we have, and it's magical in lots of different ways. The wildlife, the natural beauty, the way we all get along, the fact that you can be sitting next to a lifty or a billionaire and not be able to tell the difference, all those things. It's awesome. So what has inspired us to give since we got here is dominantly local. We still have some commitments to educational institutions that we were part of where our kids went to. I'm on the board of a school year abroad program that sends kids to live in families in France and Italy and Spain and China, and I think that's very cool. But we're involved in stuff here because we want to protect the magic of this place. And we feel that it's in grave danger. Francis just helped author a fabulous report on the state of wildlife, and you know, this is precarious, this paradise we have. You know that. And I don't want to lose it. We were on a bike trip in India, in a very easy to bike through area of India, and yet we saw stuff in Delhi and other places that look like the way the species is going to end, you know, and to come back here and see how awesome it is and how we're really getting along and cooperating on a lot of important accomplishments pretty well. We have all this natural wealth around us, but it's precarious. So I agree with Jeff. It's it's easier to write a check, and most of us will write a check for friend calls for a modest amount, but where are you going to focus your giving and where are you going to focus your time? I think it has to be the stuff that you're passionate about, whether it's something in your childhood or it's one of your loves. And one of the debates that Peggy and I have a lot is I see there's sort of two different groups of things. Ones that can elevate the top part of our community. So Jackson Hole Public Art, for example. There's Carrie. Way to go. That's raising the top part of our world fabulously. And obviously the Center for the Arts and the Grand Teton Foundation, those are taking the high part of our world higher. Then there's also a category of things where we're trying to take the bottom of our community and make it more tolerable for the people that are really struggling. Affordable housing is something that the Conservation Alliance focuses on. I think that's critical to the character of our community. So I would say I've gotten involved, and my wife Peggy's gotten involved with things that we think are sacred for one reason or another. And it really goes to the magic of this community. I think the Community Foundation obviously is one of the greatest things about this community. So when we don't give, I think it's usually not a foot fault. It's just the passion isn't as there as it is other things. So if you've now got my name and you call me and I don't respond, it's not because I don't love you. It's just that I've been loving something else more and it's taking all my time.
It's because he's a shooting star member.
No, I'm not. I'm an asshole.
By the way, other than Elaine, we've changed everyone's names to protect their identity. So really, Jeff, I think you were fluke, not fluke. I think that was, we didn't do quite as good a job with you as we did with everyone else. Thanks, Kirk. I think that's great. I've always found it curious. You both brought up the time versus money thing, and I've always found it curious that we're so comfortable asking people to give their time without thinking about the fact that time is a non-renewable resource. So when I give my time, I can't get it back. So it's I think about that really carefully. When I give money, it's something I can go out and make some more money, and I can give more. But how we think about how we ask is also really it's interesting. So Sasha. When we were talking before the conference, you told me you have 4 children, and you're very involved with them in developing their philanthropic instincts. So this is a huge question right now with this big transfer of wealth that's going to be coming at us. I'm curious to know from your perspective, what are the things that you do or the practices that you've seen are particularly effective at engaging the younger generations in philanthropy?
Steal your stand behind the chair. I am not a public speaker. We started when we moved here. Old Bill's fund run was, I think, 2 weeks after we arrived in Jackson as full-time residents. We brought our kids down, and off the kind of as a whim, my husband and I said, all right, each of you have X amount of dollars, and your job is to go find charities that you want to give to, but there's one rule. They cannot have met their match by the Old Bill's challengers. So you can't go to the biggest, the flashiest, the tents that are giving out the most things. Stop by as you wish, but when you come back to designate, make sure they haven't met their match. We've continued to do that over the years, and they've continued to get more money as we have decided not to do a family trust, and we allow them to designate an increasingly larger amount of funds every year in their name. It goes against their personal tax returns because they need to understand that they are paying taxes and that they will one day come into some money, and it's not free, and it's not for you to philander in any way, and you need to make conscientious choices. Over the years, we have seen them, one year everybody came back and gave all of their money to the Doug Coombs Foundation because they are friends with David. And so that really pointed out how important the connection of it affecting somebody personally was to this next generation. Seventh grade at Jackson Hole Middle School is involved in a passion project where they have to write an article, do a guts factor, and raise awareness to something. I have a sick 17-year-old daughter. Last year, one of her brothers chose raising awareness to invisible illnesses. He and a friend in one weekend raised close to $1,000 for the Lurie Children's Hospital, raising awareness for invisible illnesses. It was something they felt impacted. It impacted their sister. It impacted. They have a good friend who doesn't, who uses hearing aids that are very hidden, and all of a sudden it opened their eyes up to illnesses that are not just Down syndrome or autism or anything like that. They want to make a difference, and now they're very careful when they talk about their money. This year, unfortunately, one of their friends' fathers was deported after 18 years in the Valley, and they came home, and as a group of middle schoolers, really affected that somebody's dad was just sent away. How can we help? Is it something they can donate their money to his legal fund? Is there something that they can do? To see that passion in 12 and 14-year-old children is the difference that I want to make in our community, and that's kind of how we've chosen to do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Good job. I was in a grocery store one time, and there were two kids in line in front of me with their father, and they were bragging about how rich they were. And the father yanked him out of line, and he pulled him to the side, and I heard him sort of in a low voice say, "Kids, I want to be really clear with you about something. Your mother and I are very wealthy. You have nothing." Thus started their philanthropy. So Elaine, back to you for a quick second. Justin was talking before about the Aspenization, or the threat of the Aspenization of Jackson, and I'm just curious your take on, the philanthropic culture here is pretty strong, and we have newcomers coming in who may have different cultural values. So what do you think about, will the newcomers change the culture of Jackson, or will Jackson change the cultural values of the newcomers?
So having worked in Aspen for about 7 years, having worked in Aspen for about 7 years on about 8 large capital campaigns, my observation about Aspen is not as negative as everyone, I think, perceives it to be, which is they are an incredibly generous community who are extremely passionate about what that place looks like, and I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap, so I'll just put that out there first. But secondly, I do think that, as I said earlier, people come here with their heart first. They don't come here for social leverage. They're not coming here because everyone that has houses in Nantucket and Coral Gables or any of the Jupiter Island or any of those places, there is a pack mentality a little bit here where people all have houses in those places. West Palm Beach and Nantucket and Jackson Hole and Greenwich, right? I can name about 10 friends that all have that. And I sometimes think about that, but they are attracted to those places because of the people that are there and because their family want to convene there. And who are we to judge that, right? If they want to come and be here and be a part of the community and participate and give or not, there are plenty of people who come here under the radar and they don't participate at all. Maybe they give a little money to the music festival or someone else that asks them for money. But honestly, I just think that this perspective on Jackson versus Aspen, and we don't want Jackson to become like Aspen. We live in the mountains. We are mountain people. And everybody that come here are all mountain people also. And we need to embrace the mountain people and help those mountain people connect with what is speaking to them, to their heart. Now, the nonprofits in the room, that's your piece of it, right? That's the puzzle that you're putting together, is who are the donors here? Why are they here? Right, so who are these new 5%? Because this is the new territory, 2018 is gonna be a little new. Who are those 5% of those people? And what do they care about? And why are they here? That's your job, is to go figure that out. and connect those dots. And then once you do, you pull a board member in who also shares those values and have them get to know these folks and all the people that are here. Rather than worrying about Aspenization, let's figure out how to leverage those relationships that you already have on your boards and have those folks get to be good friends with the new people in town. Because honestly, I do think if you poll them, most of them are just like us. They may have a little more money than we do, but they care about this place as much as we do. And I think that's what you need to focus on.
Thank you.
Jeff, back to you for a second. I'm curious, how long have you been in Jackson now?
3 years.
3 years. So, over the past maybe 5 years, has your approach to philanthropy changed, and if so, how?
I can't say it has changed. I go back to sort of breaking down the two aspects of philanthropy, your time and money. I'm attracted to where I can make a difference. And so that hasn't changed. 5 years ago, I'm probably a little more attuned to it now. And I'm learning about this community. I mean, I think someone mentioned it earlier when Justin was talking, I think it was that young woman over there, Leslie, is that? Yeah. Where the old guard, and where I really wanted to do when I came here with my wife was to say, how do we have like an old guard mentality? What is the ethos? My guess is when you think of old guard, you're probably thinking there's a shared ethos and respect for this community. However you want to fill it out. And I think it's important for everyone. I don't think it's ultra wealthy. I think anybody who's a community member needs to have a shared ethos to make this a better community. And so I don't think it's really changed. It's just where can you be most impactful?
So what about going forward? Do you expect it to change going forward?
Yeah, I think it will change going forward because I think this community will have different issues it faces going forward. So maybe issues, I mean, I'm sure the issues, I don't know if the issues were the same as they are 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if we're facing the same issues today. But I think the community will have different issues based on today's legislation on a national level or state level. You pick a paper down, we're transitioning from coal or a more of a mineral resource to more wind. I guarantee that's going to have some implications on certain aspects of this community. So how do you play a role in making that additive? So I think the issues, as issues change, I think that things will change.
Great, thank you. Kurt, as you look around for your friends and connections who are also involved in philanthropy, have you observed any approaches that you thought were particularly effective that other people are doing?
Yes. I want to come to this audience first on what you guys can do, because it's echoing what Elaine and Jeff said. You have to figure out how to educate us new assholes, because we can learn. And I think that we came here, as Elaine says, because we're passionate about the community. We didn't know how awesome it was when we came here. We only could see what we could see. But at least since Becky and I have been here, we've learned a ton from many of the people in this room. And we're learning more. And help us find the things that are the problems and help recruit us to feel passionately like you do. Because guess what? We probably are going to agree once you train us up a little bit. The other thing I want to say is I was in Aspen the last couple of days, and that's bad, guys. I'll tell you what's coming. You heard it here first. Really garish onesies. They're fucking everywhere. Here, next season, so prepare yourself. What was the question again?
You're doing fine. Have you observed particularly effective techniques that other people use?
Well, I have a friend who does something like you've done with their kids, and this is something we talk about in our family, how to get our kids involved. Peggy and I were so busy working for 30 years that we didn't really have a significant role for philanthropy in our lives. We wrote checks when people asked us to, we gave to schools. We didn't really have a strategy about it. And I think having a strategy vis-a-vis the kids is fantastic, and I want to talk to you at lunch about how to do better in our family. I think focusing your energies on things that you care about is a good strategy as a donor, rather than writing 50 checks and not really having any impact. I think figuring out where you can really have a bigger impact and maybe concentrate the giving and the time, and getting to know the organization, and talking to the people like Marcia and Leslie who can be mentors, and getting advice about how to have a bigger impact. So I guess my advice to you is train up the newcomers. We're willing to learn, and my advice to fellow newcomers would be find mentors and be thoughtful and be willing to learn about what the community values are, because there are all kinds of things going on you don't know about, and there are lots of really cool people who are willing to help you learn. Did that answer the question?
Great, thank you. And then I think last question, we'll take some questions from the group for Sasha. I'm curious about for both for your own giving and for how you coach your kids on the filters that you use around how to choose organizations to donate to. What are some of those things, and maybe even what are some of the things that turn you off, even if you're interested in the cause?
The biggest turnoff is overhead that's too large. We want to see, again, it goes back to making that impact. That being said, you're not going to have one-offs, okay? This amazing consultant that's coming in, that's going to help you write your strategy, that's going to give you guidance, absolutely willing to help pay for those costs, to help see something into its continuity, into a life everlasting. The filters, the biggest filter is that impact, but how can we start to get involved? My advice to all of you is to figure out a way that you can get into the schools. Friends of Pathways, as I walk, I ride a bike to school, which is excellent, but how can we do it to get high schoolers on the path, making sure the elementary kids get to school okay? Get the kids involved, let them make a hands-on, feel good, walk away. I did something to impact my community today. I think it's important in the middle school. Why can't we have a not-for-profit afternoon and then figure out something once a month where these kids get together? I have for years wanted to, and unfortunately I have a sick child that takes most of my attention. But why can't we have 100 That Care program where you get 100 kids to commit $20 a semester? They're going to donate it no matter what. Kids decide which nonprofits they want to give the money to. You pull them out of a hat. They have a 5-minute presentation at the auditorium. Then everybody votes on the way out, and that's your $2,000 for that day. It's donated. It's impact. It's immediate, and kids are involved. They are the next generation. They know how to Insta, Vimeo, they don't Facebook. They call me old on Facebook, but they know how to get the word out, and that is something that we need to take advantage of.
Great, thank you.
Catherine, we clearly didn't do a good enough job of filtering the panel for passion. We should have asked them if they had passion before we invited them. So let's take some questions from the group. So Jonathan's got a mic, he's going to walk around. Please, we have this big room. Put your question to the mic. We have time for 4 or 5 questions, maybe.
I promise she didn't set me up. I'm Carter Cox, and something that I feel like we've kind of danced around today, and I'm curious to hear from the panels, is, what are your thoughts on theories of change in terms of nonprofit approaches? For example, Justin talked about conservation as a strong theme, but people not wanting to be political about their giving. And I think that I'm seeing trends in some millennials that don't care about, they're happy to get involved in advocacy. But I'm wondering, how do you all feel about, a nonprofit that is engaged in advocacy and that maybe has a longer approach to change versus something where you do see that impact next week when children are provided with books for school?
Who wants to take it?
I'll take that.
Kurt?
Well, I'm on the board of the Jacksonville Conservation Alliance, which Carter may know. And I love advocacy because we're fighting for the stuff that we care about, guys. This is going to slip away from us if we don't advocate. And I've been surprised at the reluctance to be involved with advocacy groups. But to me, advocacy done the right way is just democracy in action. I mean, we don't have to be jerks about it, but I don't know why we can't put our points of view out there pretty vociferously. And if we don't, I mean, I've been part of a number of communities where the zoning board is controlled by the construction trade, and by God, you can see that. And so if we don't fight the natural instincts of the way democracy works, we're gonna end up in a bad, bad spot. So I think we have to advocate, and I hope everybody in this room has something they're passionate about and is advocating about. I think it's critical that we disagree agreeably, and that's more important in a town this size than in New York City, but it's really important everywhere. Maybe it's a lost art. But so I'm a huge advocate for advocacy. Anybody want to take this?
All right. Another question?
I actually have one more follow-up, even though I'm not supposed to say anything very quickly.
But that's not gonna
There
stop
is
you.
yeah, it's hard for me. I have bumped up against some of the high net worth individuals that are giving to projects that I'm working on, where they have asked to, basically have communicated to the organization that their focus is this 2018 election. So there are many large donors who are actually advocating toward a blue wave, as I'm starting to call it, this year, and really focusing their money there. And so I don't think you'll hit that here as much, but on the national scale, that is a factor.
Okay, next question, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I have a curiosity is how many here are involved in nonprofits, are here as a nonprofit representative? Can you raise your hands? Okay. So that's about half, or maybe 3/4 of the room. I am in an interesting position. My name is Tracy Lamb. I am third generation. My grandfather homesteaded here in 1914. I am old guard, I suppose, but I'm also new guard. I had no idea what my parents were worth, or my grandfather. They kept that very close to their chest. And I want to accolades to you for teaching your kids, letting them in on, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, and educating. My family is very tight-lipped about money. I mean, it was a generational thing. I think you just didn't talk about it. Growing up here, there were very little haves and have-nots. It was isolated. We got snowed in a couple of weeks a year in the winter. My mom stockpiled food. I grew up eating out of cans. It's like, the snowshoe with the 50-mile trip to the school. Both ways, uphill. Today I see a similarity in that same thing. We are basically an island, this little valley we have, even though we've got the jet service and the good road service and whatnot, we're still a kind of an isolated little community. And what I still see is this group, this room of nonprofits that are essentially competing for the valley dollar, right? To keep alive, to be in existence. But here we are, all in the same room. And we're learning how to help each other. And in my role as on the board of a very small nonprofit in the valley that has national consequences, I'm in a position to both, and I think a lot of people who are on boards are in the position of giving and their time and their money, right? My question is, I'm not a very social creature. I've worked out of my house for like 40 years, and I go forage for food and I go back,
I'll be your friend. I'll be your friend.
Thank you, let's talk. Anyway.
So you're Tracy, your question.
The question is, how does a small nonprofit become visible? We are talking a lot about going out to PR firms, marketing firms, all this other stuff that I'm just not. And you know, early on, Jonathan talked about not treating your nonprofit as a business. What are our options other than that model?
So
How does a nonprofit who is small, who isn't the art center, who isn't the music festival, become visible to the people that can help?
so
How does that relation happen?
the great question, thank you. The Community Foundation, rather than digging into that right here, which is, the Community Foundation has a whole series of workshops for nonprofits on how to do just those kinds of things. So I would suggest, if you're not already on it, get on the listserv for, or if you're using pigeons, you know, make sure your pigeon gets to them, and go to some of those workshops. It's a great way to figure it out.
Can we hear briefly from the panelists?
Sure. Elaine, you
I
got
have
a
a quick.
quickie?
So what I tell my clients and what is most impactful for me relative to learning about what organizations do has changed a little bit since 20 years ago. And basically what you need to do is get your iPhone, if you have one, or it looks like you do, and have a video, set it on video, and talk to the people that are involved in your organization and interview them. And whether you email that to people that you know, or you put it on Instagram or Facebook, don't pay for anything in print. Do everything digitally. Get a 6-slide PowerPoint, also known as a pitch deck in the industry, and get as much video footage as you can, and weave that footage together to tell your story. Tell your story. Talk about your impact. That's what's going to grab any of us into your circle. And it's nothing in writing. Things that are in print, you don't want to spend money on print. You know, I don't want to say you don't want to hire a PR agency, because I think they actually are really good money spent, because they can help you be efficient and tell a story that is impassioned and that is going to grab people and pull them in.
Thank you. Well done. All right, time for one more question. Back here.
Hi everyone, I'm Paige Byron, and my question sort of relates to some things I've heard from these panelists and also from Justin earlier about giving to this community versus giving to national organizations that might be working in this community. So I work for a conservation organization that is national, but we're currently running a capital campaign for a very locally driven project that gets directly at retaining community character and helping with equity and all sorts of things that have come up today. And I'm just interested from the perspective of the panelists, how do we as a national organization either leverage relationships that you might have with other staff people or board members in other areas, New York City or California or wherever you came from, but also are you more likely to be giving to local groups or national organizations that might have the ability to also have a local impact, and why not?
Jeff?
I have no bias. I think it's really the work itself. I don't start the year thinking, okay, I want to do like 64% locally, 30. No, I don't break it down that way. It's usually what more sort of speaks to me or resonates. I always see this as a citizen in all this community. I'm definitely thinking more of a lens toward how we move the needle here. So that's how I sort of maybe view it. The one thing I would just say, since so many of you raised your hands at nonprofit, I'll just tell you a story. When I, in 2006, when I became CEO of this African humanitarian organization, we really focused on what was called the Millennium Development Goals. And I won't get into that, but this was like a global Bill of Rights, if you will. Eight sort of Bill of Rights, quite 8 sort of rights that the UN, all 194 countries agreed on at the UN. And so a lot of it was around food security in these subsistence farming places. And so I found it so much easier. I could literally get $1 million from a donor in one meeting. If the money was going to go toward fertilizer or bore wells to access the water table or long-lasting insecticide-treated bed nets. But I couldn't get $20,000 for a fax machine or office. And so the whole notion was that people just wanted to get for the programmatic work. So if I learned one thing running a nonprofit for 3 years, I would suggest, and it kind of piggybacks off of your comment, if you do your due diligence on a nonprofit, the best gift you could give them is an unrestricted gift.
Yes.
Yes, and 75% of the audience is nonprofits. Well done, well done. So unfortunately, we're running short on time. I want to ask our panel one last question, which is this. And Sasha, I'm going to start with you. It's the same question for all of you. When you think about your philanthropy over time, what's the one thing that, the one bit of advice that you never got that you wish you had gotten about philanthropy?
I touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's the looking at your nonprofits financials, something that my family never spoke of when we were giving and donating and time, things like that, service hours when I was growing up. And that is something that we are trying to pass on to our kids. I'm married to a man that lives in the P&L, and so we want to pass that on to our kids as well.
Well, I guess I would echo that in a different way, which is to just say, I wish I had had the courage to ask more about institutions that I was getting involved with. And what I found is that the information flow is incredibly forthcoming if you just ask. And so, what are the other ways I could give? What are the specific programs? Because maybe I don't like this thing as much as I like that thing. And just being proactive and trying to figure out how to be impactful in places where it's consistent with the things that we're passionate about as a family. I think you guys, as a group, do a very good job of making that information available, but I would say the other side of it is, don't be shy about it. You know, tell people why this is what you're doing is cool. If you have a specific program, you know, getting the information out so that you can find those people who agree with what you're doing, because they're there. It's just getting the information out. So that's it.
So the question was, what advice do I wish I had before?
Yeah.
There's probably two things. One, what I just said before, I think the best, what I didn't know before I got into the nonprofit world is just how powerful an unrestricted gift is to the organization. Just didn't really have the full context of how vital that is. And probably the second thing is just a quote, Andrew Carnegie said, which is, probably heard this quote, which is, a man or a woman who dies rich dies thus disgraced. And I do believe that.
Thank you.
It's amazing. I think mine is stay focused, and stay focused on your passion. I've served on boards and participated as a donor with organizations that really, I came to an evolution of that it's not actually where my passion was, and so right now I'm sort of in this position where I find myself on two boards as a board member, and when I hear myself describe what I'm doing in terms of my board service, it's all about climate and energy independence and funding for renewables and rebuilding the grid so that we actually can be a renewable energy culture as opposed to an extractive energy culture. And so it's fun, and I actually described this to someone yesterday on a chairlift, or a couple days on a chairlift, and I said, you see the theme, right? So find what you're passionate about and go for it. And do not be distracted by kind, nice people that ask you to be on their board or ask you for money in areas that you're not passionate about, because you end up in a situation that isn't in your heart. So follow your heart.
Thank you. Thank you all. Let's hear it for the panel.